Yes.
Well, Suzie Miller, welcome to our bookshelf.
It's lovely to be here, Jen.
Thank you so much. So we were just starting to chat a little bit before we started recording, and we were talking about how I've been so fascinated with the different processes of different writers, and you were starting to say, and I stopped you because I wanted to save it for the actual interview.
Yeah.
That's also intriguing to you. Do you want to kind of expand on that a little bit based on where we were in that conversation?
Yeah. We were just talking about process and the process of writers. And I said that what's been fascinating for me as I've kind of increased the areas that I write in and the forms that I write in is that writers are also fascinated what other writers use for their process. So I think for me, moving into screen and moving into novel writing from theatre has been a real eye-opener, because some of the little things that you find in screen, you go, I wish I'd known about this. This is quite useful for actually writing theatre. And then some of the things in screen, I say, I can't believe they spend so much time doing that. In theatre, we just do it in real life. Like, we just sit down and we actually play it out. This is
Yeah.
crazy that they spend hours and hours with executives churning out notes when it's such an easy solve with a very quick conversation. So I've kind of I find that what I do now is have confidence in that process from the other area that I write in, and I guess in some way borrow from each to the other. But with novel writing, it's quite a separate thing altogether. But having written the play, the story had been so interrogated by myself and also, of course, by the people that produced it.
Yeah.
So I had such a template that I could just literally write into that world without having to have millions of notes.
Yeah. Well, and so let's get into that for just a second. So the play is called Prima Facie, which is a Latin phrase, which is on the face of it. Is that
On the
correct?
face, it's also a legal term. So as you
Hmm.
know, a lot of law, particularly in the UK and Australia and New Zealand, but probably in also in the States,
Yeah.
borrows from Latin as a way of, using, I guess, words probably to intimidate people. Ultimately, we've kept some of those that majesty about the law to keep it a little bit hard to access, and so you need an expert. But also, it does very easily explain, it encapsulates a concept. And so prima facie is at first glance or on the face of it. And I guess in law, what that means is, if you have a prima facie case, it means you have a case that's good enough, or at least a case that should go to court to be answered. So, and I'm playing with that concept a bit in the novel and in the story by saying, on the face of it, you see a certain way a trial is run, but you don't know what's happening underneath it. And you also don't know the lens within which the law is looking at a particular story or a particular thing that happened. And you need to deconstruct that and interrogate the actual system, not just the evidence at hand.
Yeah. And so just for, but I mean,
complicated.
I know it's a lot. I mean, but it's also like, I saw you describe it in an interview somewhere, but I'm going to ask you to do it again. But, if you could just describe briefly the play for anyone who maybe hasn't seen it or been able to read the play. Our hope is that a lot of people, by the time they're seeing this interview, because we'll be putting out little quotes and different things throughout the month for people to have a taste of wanting to get a copy and read it or listen to it on Audible or something. But what would your brief description be?
The play is now the novel, and so the novel is the whole story, whereas the play 90-minute snatch of the story, really, that we could put on stage. But the story in the novel is about a woman who's a barrister, which is a litigator, I guess, in American terms. But in the UK and Australia and other places, we still have a divided system where you're a specialist barrister. You only go to court. There's a whole lot of, I guess, traditions and rules around being a barrister, one of which I'll explain later. But she's a barrister from a working class background. She had a scholarship to Cambridge. She's entered into this institution, which is very heavily influenced by class, and she's made it almost to the top, and she's doing brilliantly. And she does a great job of defense work, which is, defending people. And she believes she's doing a human rights action by really making sure people have their say in court. And then she does a lot of sexual assault defenses as well. And then she finds herself actually the victim and survivor of a sexual assault by a colleague of hers who's very well-to-do and comes from a very established legal family. And so I guess the tables are turned on her, and she's suddenly a witness in the courtroom where she used to cross-examine the same sort of witness. and she has an insight into exactly what the system is doing because she sees it from the other side. And I guess it's me exploring, as I used to be a lawyer, exploring what I came up, I was like very strongly, as I think most people would be, innocence until proven guilty. And I still am very strongly that it's the bedrock of why we have a society that we consider a free society. There's not a random locking up of people. But it occurred to me while I was studying law and while I was practicing law. And when I was practicing law, I did a lot of work with victims of sexual assault as well. I would take statements from young women for victims' compensation, which we have in Australia and in other as in they would get some money just for counseling, basically. So I took a lot of statements to get that, and I realized that so few of them actually got to court, and if they did, I'd say 99.9% of them lost. So I thought, wow, it's not really an even playing field, and why is that? And did a sort of interrogation of the law and thought, okay, the law has been decided but from the perspective of being a man, because they're all male, very white, very heterosexual, very privileged white men for generations and generations that have been judges who have molded the law to look at it from the perspective of the person that's actually been accused of sexual assault, not from the person that's actually being examined in court. And I guess what was interesting for me is the recognition that the scene of the crime is actually a woman's body, and they have to stand up there and remember something that was very traumatic for them in this very neat scientific forensic manner. And in doing that, whenever they sort of are slightly inconsistent or they haven't noticed the peripheral details, the assumption is that they're inconsistent, and inconsistency means you're not reliable and you're probably lying. So yes, in that regard, it's more traumatizing for women in many ways to go to court, because then they get a double whammy of not only has something happened to them, but then when they try to explain it, the system doesn't support them and doesn't actually allow them to explain it the way that they experienced it. So they're re-traumatized again, and then they feel the community doesn't believe them. So it was a quandary for me.
I mean, and the thing, it's a quandary, I feel like, in so many countries still, and that, I feel like, I think I say in my review of this, like, it feels like a call to action that we have to find a better way. But I also, just in you talking about, like, the victims having to get up and have their bodies have been the scene of the crime. One of the things I found so interesting about the writing was that when the assault happens to Tess, the way you describe it is so visceral and so you feel it in your body when you're reading it, and then the different way that it's presented when she's on the stand, it's so precisely different, and I just wondered how you went about achieving that, just from like a logistical standpoint, because like it's clearly a choice that you made, but I just don't know how you achieve that, like what was that process like?
It's a great question, coming after talking about process as well, because one of the things that you realize is, as a lawyer, you tell the court the best version of your client's story. And it's a storytelling kind of persuasive element. And I think what I realized is that when I was taking statements from these young women who didn't even want to make the statements, mostly they were so traumatized. Then when I saw, if they did go to court, how it was re-narratized in court. So how the methodology of the legal system changed their story so it fitted into a structure that made them look like they didn't really know what happened. And I wanted to like prize that apart and say, why does that happen? And then, it was really interesting to me because so many things came about as a consequence of this story, particularly legal change, which is astonishing to me. Yeah, really amazing, which I'll tell you about shortly. But I think what was really interesting to me is how much it rang true with women who like saw the play, read the book. I mean, the book has been launched in Australia. It's soon to be launched, and it's, I think, pre-order in the US at the moment. But it was so interesting to me to like prize that apart and go, look, it's actually about re-narratizing a story without using the person's lived experience as the methodology for explaining it, but telling them they have to abide by a certain storytelling rule that's been set up because men have actually created the system. And so it's set up with that in mind. Now, one of the really interesting things, and I'll say this to you because you're in the US and she's such an idol of mine, is that when I did a year of my law degree on exchange, I met with Catherine McKinnon, who is a jurisprudence lecturer and an incredible thinker from New York. And had a lecture with her where she talked about this idea of all these systems that are set up. And if you look at them through a feminist lens, you see how they fail women over and over again. They've been constructed only with a male perspective. So, for example, it wasn't until the 90s, which is relatively recently.
Yeah,
that actually they took off the law books that, you couldn't rape your wife, because the idea being that once you'd consented to marriage, you had consented, therefore, for the purpose of men to believe that they had consent for the whole of your lifetime whenever that person wanted to have sex with you. So it was impossible to rape your wife as a male.
Wow.
Now, I'm sure there's all sorts of systemic reasons why that was a nice cut and dry reason for the courts to go, oh, well, they're married, so it's not possible. And I think, we've taken that off the books now. But in the same way that, that was something that was on the books until the 90s, you think, we need to actually look at the ways that women are not believed in court and what those myths are around that, which are sort of rape myths, and also women's myths. Like even as women, even ourselves, without even recognizing it, we have all been brought up, and all men, even sort of feminist men, have been brought up under the patriarchy with that kind of idea and that ideology. So we all have to kind of interrogate it within ourselves. When you hear something saying, oh, well, she was a sex worker, and you go, well, you can still rape a sex worker, or oh, she was wearing that, or she was drunk. So, and people, the horror of what can happen to women, I guess we like to differentiate and say, well, I wouldn't have been out that late, or I wouldn't have been drinking that much. But the truth of the matter is, we should be able to make choices there's never an invitation for that level of violence, or any violence for that matter.
Well, I think it's got to be so hard for men to, and I don't mean this at all as a defense of them. I just mean it as like the differentiation of experience in life. But for a man to not understand what that lack of safety feels like, or to that vulnerability. I mean, this is a very different example, but on a much smaller scale of like, talking to male friends about like never walking anywhere alone without your keys in your fingers. And they're like, what? I mean, it's like, so, and their reaction is like, why would you do that? Because it doesn't occur to them that they might be unsafe. And so it's that thing of like, it's so ingrained in women of like, it's on us to try to find a way to keep us safe. And it's, like, okay, I need to have the mace in my purse and the thing. And am I looking in every direction? Like, men don't live feeling that way for the most part. I'm sure there are places in the world, and I'm sure in this country too, where that, there's maybe that might be true for men too, but like, in general, as a blanket statement, women do have to sort of live worrying about themselves in that way. And
I mean, I say I have a challenge when I do my book tour, and I say, I don't know a woman who hasn't walked home at night from the station that hasn't held her keys or her phone in a certain way and been hyper vigilant about the person on the other side of the road that happens to be a man, and looked around for who else is about, and been very, and I said, that's 100% of female population that has done that. But the other thing is that they're not just scared that someone's going to take their handbag. They're actually scared they're going to be raped and murdered.
100%.
That's a really big stakes are really big. And when men hear that, they go, oh, wow, that's awful. And so you plan your life around not being in that situation, which means you have to catch taxis, and then you're at risk with a taxi driver. So there's just so many ways that, that the world has not been built around to make women feel safe.
I'm so excited to share that our podcast is brought to you in partnership with Seed. As many of you know, I am a huge advocate of this incredible company and their DSO1 Daily Symbiotic, which I have taken every day for years. DSO1 is a 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic formulated with 24 clinically and scientifically studied strains for whole body benefits, including gut, skin, and heart health. I started taking Seed daily because I love how seriously they are about their science. It's formulated based on robust clinical and mechanistic research with probiotic strains. And super good news, there's no refrigeration necessary. Seed's patented capsule design safeguards probiotics through digestion for delivery of an average of 100% of their starting dose to your colon. I also love Seed's commitment to environmental health. They have developed probiotics for honeybees, coral reefs, and have created new standards in sustainable packaging. Your first month of Seed includes a refillable glass jar and complimentary vial for on the go, and refills arrive each month in a compostable bio pouch. For our listeners, Seed is offering 25% 25% off your first order. Go to seed.com/jensbookshelf. Use code jensbookshelf for 25% off your first order of Seed.
What's interesting about this, even this book tour, and just like talking about the play and the consequences and everything, is recognizing that, I'm the mother of a son and a daughter, and I don't want my son to be educated in a way that he doesn't understand consent and all its nuance. I want him to feel safe to explore his sexuality without ever having the shock of realizing that he's done something to someone that's awful.
Yeah.
And I also think that the consequences of sexual assault convictions are really high. You go to prison. So, we actually have to change as a community so that we understand what respect to women is, what it actually means, and what consent is, and how it's not a blanket rule, and how it's just about, if you're accessing someone's body and having an intimate relationship, it's just about saying, is this okay? And hearing the answer.
Yeah.
Like, not just about assuming an answer.
Right.
And even, and also recognizing that what you see on porn is actually entertainment. It's not education about sex, and it's not actually something that you learn from. It's actually something that is an entertainment source, but that most of our young men are being brought up, and our young women are being brought up, that that's normalized sexuality.
Well, especially with the internet now, right? I mean, in terms of all of the access to it.
24/7. And I think that, we have to really be clear that we have conversations with our kids and our young people that that's not an education tool. It's actually a entertainment tool. And as an education tool, it will fail you, because it's not what women necessarily. It's not how most people look, or the length of various items on people's bodies. It's set up to make you feel like, oh my gosh, this is not my experience. I better make it.
This is a fantasy in some way, not something that,
Exactly.
Well, and so what's really fascinating to me, just hearing you talk about all this, because clearly, the heartbeat of all of these things and your intentions and your experience with the law and the things that had your attention about what needs to change is definitely everywhere in this play. Yet it's wildly entertaining. I don't feel like I'm being preached to at all. I've seen clips of Jodie Comer on stage doing it, who just is absolutely captivating. I wish I could have gotten to New York to see the production, because there was a London production and a New York production. Am I right?
Yeah, it was the same production. It just transferred to Broadway.
Okay, but either way, I wasn't able to get there. I was fascinated and wanting to see it, so I've been able to sort of like fill in the blanks a little bit by seeing clips. But so what is that process like when you know that something has this heavy of intention, kind of not even buried, but just like sustaining it? And yet you have something that is so compelling for audiences and also so challenging for one actress to pull off. What was that process like, seeing it get on its feet, watching Jodie have to memorize 90 minutes of material from start to finish by herself?
I know.
The lighting design, this is a big question, because I know I'm kind of multifaceting it, but I'm just so curious how you take, you had this seed idea of this concept that is this big and heavy, and yet you were able to create a team of people to give the world a visual, visceral, emotional experience that doesn't feel off-putting. So how does that journey start?
Look, it's a great question. And it's a really interesting journey that's quite familiar to theatre makers, which is with that, when I wrote the piece and I had to make the structure work and the one person capacity of it work, I wanted it to have moments of lightness and humor. I wanted to see things early that paid off big time later, which is what every good playwright, or every playwright that really wants to work on something that is compelling to an audience, will do. So I did my part, and then I worked with Jodie and the director and the designers, and we built on that. There were little triggers in the play that actually created ideas. We went out, I took them out to courts and introduced them to barristers, and the designers picked up on all those white folders. But also that I would talk about this idea of, how many cases, because it's basically 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted or raped. Out of those, 1 in 10 will go to the police. Out of those 1 in 10 that actually go, very few go to court. Out of the ones that go to court, there's a 1.3% conviction rate. So if you saw the set of, there were loads and loads of these folders, which at the end make a statement, because you realize you've been watching this show the whole time thinking they're all just files and files, which of course they are, but you realize that each one represents a woman that hasn't been heard. So I think in a way it was And it was actually, and what's great about theater is you build those creative concepts together. Like I talk about why I wrote certain paragraphs, why I wrote certain scenes, and the designer would pick up on something and say, oh, you're saying that actually women aren't heard. And
Yeah.
the director would say, and what we're going to do with Jodie here is this, to really emphasize that on a theatrical language level in terms of this, in terms of how she's going to move and how
Wow.
her persona is going to change from one set to the other. And then I'm talking about how we re-narratize. So we did other things to connect up with that. So it's really a conceptual conversation overall to create the final piece. And there's hundreds of people behind those people that actually do the building, and the producer has to, really manage the ship basically.
Yeah.
And so it's a big trust exercise, but I was really with the best of the best. I mean, honestly, my team were the best you could ever have. They were astonishing. And, we took a risk on Jodie because she'd never done theater, but we really believed in her. And we
Wow, I
really
didn't
believed.
know that. She had never done theater.
And she won an Olivier and a Tony for the show.
I
And
can't believe that that's her
yeah,
first play. That's so
I think
crazy.
I think she'd done a sort of like a short monologue when she was 16 where she grew up, but she'd never been in London theater before.
Wow.
I know. So it was pretty impressive. But, the other thing is that the play also started in Australia with a magnificent actor, Sheridan Harbridge here.
Oh,
But she didn't go to the West End with it. But, so I was able to hone the play in that first premiere production and that toured the country in Australia. So by the time it came to Jodie, I rewrote it for the UK. So the UK is the standard text.
oh, how
And
interesting.
yeah, because I thought, like the great thing about Jodie is she had that Liverpool accent. So she had a Liverpool accent and a London accent. And the difference between Australia and America and the UK is that the UK has an oral landscape where you can figure out where someone's from very quickly
Yeah.
based on their accent. So you can live an hour out of London, you have a different accent. It's kind of
Wow.
amazing. But class is such a big deal in London and in England that just her having an accent with her family that was different to the one she used in court already told you so much without me even mentioning class.
Oh, how cool.
So it added that layer of class distinction just by her opening her mouth before she even rolls her eyes at one of the sort of posh boys. She's already established that she's not an inner sanctum person.
Wow. That's really cool. I loved too how like the play opens with the description of the horse, and it's such a masculine open to the play. Yeah, and she almost is like, I don't know, maybe I'm imagining this, and maybe it's just because I was like just dreaming it up in my head as I was reading it, but there's a masculinity almost to how she carries herself when she is on that side of the law. And then I feel like there was a very intentional like wave into a different kind of sense of femininity, and the way that the words moved and the way things came out of her mouth and the way she saw the world, like her lens shifted in some ways.
And I think all of us would agree that our lens shifts in terms of experience. Like, even now I was talking to a really close friend of mine whose parents or her mother is, dying, basically very unwell. And she said, I didn't know this was what this was. The things that I'm experiencing, I knew you went through it, but I didn't know it was like this. And I go, I know. It's like when you have a child and you think, oh my God, all these people have been mothers and had babies for years. I didn't know how intense it was, or how much work, or how much you change as a person, as a consequence.
Yeah.
So I really wanted that to show exactly how she changed by having this insight into something that she had only known as a kind of academic argument. And suddenly she was someone that had gone through it and realized that she was on the other side of the legal system and she was experiencing it differently. And there is a call to action from her that she finds a voice after being silenced.
Yeah. It's really, yeah, I really wish I could have seen it on stage. I saw some of the clips even like, was it raining on stage? Did I see that? How did that happen?
The designer was amazing because of course she comes out of the shower and she goes onto the street, and we just wanted to make her as vulnerable as possible. She's going to leave her home because the rape happened at home. So she's walking the streets, and we just thought, if we just like make it so bad for her, like she has to, and then there's a play on the cab rank rule, which is a rule of barristers in the UK, which means that you have to take a case if it's in your area. Like you don't get to choose the case. If you're available, like at a cab rank or a taxi rank, you have to take the ride.
Yeah.
And so that's love the interest. So we played a bit about cabs as well. So she gets in a cab after the sexual assault, and the guy doesn't want to take her because hasn't got a good ride. But she this rule is so ingrained in barristers that she kind of argues the point. But having said that, I won't give away too much of the story because there is a book coming out and the play is going on still in various countries. But I guess what I learned was amazing is that there are a couple of things that happened in London and in New York, just with audiences. First of all, Jodie and I have been inundated with like DMs and messages and letters.
Wow.
There's this massive following. I mean, Jodie has an incredible following already, but I feel like this conversation with women in their 20s and 30s is just so opened up.
Yeah.
They're so great. Women in their 20s and 30s, they're just so prepared to have those hard conversations. They're amazing. But, and I'm so excited for the future with those women leading us, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just, at least they've spent their lives with people telling them that they have a voice, and that that they can be believed, because it's like you were saying earlier, none of us realize how deeply ingrained old ideas are in us. It's like, and we're constantly trying to interrogate them and make things better, but we'll never know what we don't know, because we don't know what we don't know, and so
and that's Tessa. She says there's a line in the play and in the book where she says, once you see, you can't unsee.
Yeah.
But until you see, you don't see.
No.
You actually don't see it until you go, oh, I see. Oh my gosh, how did I miss that?
Yeah.
So, and sometimes it suits us not to see, but then once you do, you have to do something about it, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's been amazing to me, that the human beings that have seen the play or read the book, they've all said, right, once I realized that paradox, or that that knot in the law, now I want something to change. And I had a judge that called me after she'd seen, a judge from the Old Bailey who saw the play in the West End, called me the next day and said, like, I saw your play, I've got your number from one of the barristers who knows you. She's a big judge at the Old Bailey, and she said, I write the directions to the jury that judges have to read to juries every time it's a case. And she said, and I stayed up last night and I rewrote the direction to the jury on rape and sexual assault. And I've used words from the story in the direction because I feel like that's actually what has to be said to these people, to the jury, so they know that just because you don't remember it a certain way doesn't mean you're lying. Just because you're traumatized, it could be you're traumatized. Just because you didn't run or scream or kick, that you froze, that's a legitimate survival mechanism that kicks in sometimes when you're under threat.
How amazing.
I know. And so when I put down the phone, I thought, gosh, all those years at law school and all that practice I did before I became a lawyer were all worth it, just for that 5 minutes of thinking that woman now. So it's not really about the writer writing the change. It's actually the writer illuminating something that the people who have the power to make change either see or read or
are moved by.
And once you see it, they go, I have the power to change this. Maybe I'll do what I can. And they do. And it doesn't have
incredible.
To be a judge. It could just be that you go home and you have a conversation with your kids at dinner. It doesn't have to be like changing the whole system. It could be changing the system within your child's
future. One person at a time is enough. I mean, that's it's so important. For those of you who don't know, I've struggled with ocular migraines since 2011. If you also live with migraines, you know how debilitating they can be. What I didn't realize for such a long time was that certain foods are considered common triggers, but avoiding these foods in daily life can be challenging. That's why when I heard about EMEA from their founder, John, who also struggles with migraines, I was excited to give the brand a try. EMEA makes snack bars free of the most common triggers. Their bars are free from nuts, chocolate, soy, gluten, dairy, and artificial sweeteners. The bars are soft baked and include a delicious blend of gluten-free oats and superfood seeds plus natural sweeteners. And they're absolutely delicious. Trust me, I'm not one to sacrifice good taste, and these bars require no sacrifice. I eat them every day as a breakfast replacement or a midday snack, or while I'm on set. I found them super useful while I was working on the play in Chicago. It was amazing to have them on hand. Head over to helloamia.com and use code JENSBookshelf for 30% off. That's helloamia.com.
There's also now there's a rule that judges in Northern Ireland have to watch a video of that play before they're allowed to sit on the bench to do practice. Yes,
that's incredible, Suzie. I mean, wow.
beyond my dream, you know. But then there was this other thing where 3,000 police officers in North Yorkshire, which is, you know, northern England, you
Yeah.
know, sort of area where there's a lot that goes on and the police are very involved. You know, just as in they have, you know, and they all saw the same, they saw the play, and they had a big conversation, and I got letters from those police saying, oh, I didn't realize how many mistakes I was making or how I was making someone feel. I will never do that again. I'm sort of shamed now by watching this piece and recognizing myself in the police officer.
How
And I thought,
beautiful too that they're realizing that from watching a piece of
I
art,
know.
instead of being
These
accused of something, right? Like that there's like
yeah,
space for them
yeah.
to be better.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, because to me it was like these big, I mean, when I said, you know, they're North Yorkshire, I mean big burly blokes that have, you know, been policing forever.
Yeah.
And they're not going to listen to someone saying, I'm going to give you a lecture about what you should be doing. They saw it for themselves and thought, oh, I don't want to be part of that way of doing it.
Wow.
So that to me is really exciting. And it sort of says, you know, art can change people, not by lecturing to them, but by just showing them a story where they want the protagonist to have a good experience, and
Yeah.
they want justice, and they realize, oh, I see why justice isn't happening. It's not because she's not telling the truth. It's because the system can't hear the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, I thought it was such a brilliant, I have this other question I keep wanting to get to, but so I don't want to forget that question. But
Yeah.
I am interrupting my own thought to say, I think it was such a brilliant decision to choose the type of assault that you chose in the writing,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it was not, I don't know what the words are. I don't quite know how to articulate it. It's messy, it's blurry, it's like the lines are gray. She had consented to sex with him
Yeah.
before and then didn't consent in this moment. And he was ignoring the lack of consent because he felt some sort of permission from the previous time. Like, you know, so it was like it was so perfectly complicated, because those are the things that I, you know, as a woman, thank God I haven't been in that
Yeah.
particular situation, but I feel like I've been in gray
Yeah.
zones like that where I'm like, hang on.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's
You know,
like,
I don't know anyone that hasn't been in a gray zone like that, at least, or like had a near miss situation or something.
yeah,
But to me, the reason I chose that was also because, you know, it's very easy to be outraged and to believe someone who is 16, white, pretty, walking down the street as a virgin,
yeah,
grabbed behind the bushes and sexually assaulted. Terrible, horrific, violent thing. But the lines are very clear. Like people
yeah,
go, oh, obviously the guy's a monster.
yeah,
But you know, the idea that you could actually be the rapist yourself because you're not listening, like because
right,
you're not, you know, like in women's experience of sexual assault and rape is so much more likely to be in the gray zone, where
yeah,
they've actually consented to something, or they've agreed to go to somebody's house, and then things get out of control, and they're saying no, but they're not being heard. And
yeah,
and also that then they come away and they feel guilty because they've internalized the rape myths of, well, why did you go to his house? Or why did you have sex with him earlier? Why did you
totally,
have a drink with him? Basically, why did you trust him? And so they
God,
think that it's
yeah.
kind of their fault, and we shame them for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think about things that I did when I was in my 20s, when you just don't know better, you know, where
Yeah,
like there's a house I drive past in LA all the time. And it was like I went to like, I think maybe a premiere party or something. And it was like,
yeah,
you know, with all these people and everybody's friendly and everybody knows each other. And then all of a sudden, this guy who I've been talking to all night, who I wasn't attracted to at all, or
yeah,
was
yeah,
even thinking about, he's telling me about this movie that he wrote. Now he wants to show me the script and this and that one, and invites me back to his house, which, you know, I had
yeah,
had a couple drinks and I wasn't really thinking about it. Thank God this guy was a good guy. You know what I mean? It was like I was
yeah,
like suddenly
yeah. I'm
arriving at his
scared.
house
I was so
going,
scared of
no,
what
no,
you
no, I know,
said.
I know I'm telling a story that sounds like it's going to be terrible. I mean,
Yeah,
this was good news, which was this guy was a good guy. You know what I mean? Where it was like, I got there and realized like, oh, no one else came with us. I was under the impression like
yeah,
a bunch of us were coming here and that we were going to
yeah,
continue the
yeah,
conversation. And it was like just us. And then I
yeah,
was like, oh, okay, I've got to figure out how to get a cab and get home. And this is pre-Uber
yeah,
days and whatever. But every
yeah,
time I drive past that house, I'm sure he doesn't even live there anymore because it was
yeah,
20 years
yeah.
ago. But, you know, it's like, I just think, thank God that guy was a good
I
person, because
know.
here I was, a very smart person who like is
Yeah,
careful, is cautious, does put my keys in my fingers, you know, like, you know,
exactly.
and you know, we're all capable of misreading the situation, especially when we're
Yeah,
that young and have had a couple drinks, you know. So
totally,
um
totally.
it's just
I
such a tricky
absolutely
thing.
hear you. And I think, you know, and I guess that's a really great example because it shows how blameless it is to do that, but how it's the trust of, like, you just trust someone and go, and then you go, am I crazy for trusting someone, like a human being, that they're not going to actually,
Yeah.
attempt to destroy my life,
And also
basically.
sad that you're assuming the story was going to be terrible, because we
Yeah,
hear the
exactly.
terrible version of that story so often, it's just,
And I
anyway,
think
I'm going to jump to a process question just because I'm so fascinated by this, and I don't want to, I know we're already getting close to the end of our time, which is so crazy. But,
yeah.
so when you were writing the play,
Mm-hmm.
this is a two-part question.
Yes.
Do you write with an outline, or is it more of an intuitive process? And then once you got through that process and you had to expand the play into a novel,
Yes.
what did that look like in terms of like laying out the structure to be able to expand something that already existed?
Okay, this is a great question. Hard to answer because so much of it is intuitive, but I'm going to be as clear as I can be. So bear with me. I think what happened for me is that I knew what the issue was, and then I had to find the story that matched it. And I thought, I have to find someone that actually believes in the law so much, and then it turns on her. And so I
Yeah.
came up with the idea of a barrister. And then the other thing I had to do was then come up with a structure. And you'll notice that the structure in both the novel and in the play is a now and then a then now, then.
Mm.
So it's sort of like you're following a contemporary story, and every now and then you go back to something in her life that you'll know that all comes together in the end. But once I came up with that structure, I would do a 1-page, almost a drawing of kind of like a circle of where all the different things were that I wanted to write about her life.
Mm.
Very, very sketchy. And then, think about that a little bit longer, like let it brew, I guess. I mean,
Mm.
you don't realize when you're walking the dog that you're actually working.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I try to convince my tax agent of that. I don't think so. But, but so, like, so you just think on that for a while, and then when you realize you've got it all there, like you've held the whole story in your head, then I just lock myself away and I write absolutely
Wow.
hot kind of like mess of like, I'm not going to leave this room till I'm done.
Mm.
And just in the world of it, and I just keep writing, and it writes itself basically on some level. And then that's a very rough first draft, and I'd go back and shape and play with that a lot. Then I'd get some dramaturgy and do it again. But then what happens is, because I have the play, I have an outline, I guess, for the story I want to tell. But
Yeah.
the other thing is that the original hot mess of that play was about 3 hours long. And
Wow.
so I have the outline for the novel straight from there, because there's no way to
Oh.
play. And so then I have to go back for the play and take out some of my absolute darlings, because I think has to be 90 minutes, can't show that on stage so easy. So that has to go, even though it's one of the most important factors for her. And then
Wow.
I'd take out something else that I think, oh, I'd love to just have her in court again and show you how she cross-examines that person. But that's a whole other sort of 10 minutes or another 15 minutes that I can't do on stage. So
Yeah.
take that off. And then, like, and as you're getting to know her more, you think more things that you would love to put in, but you can't, and so you have this great pile of all the things that you want to tell about her backstory and who she is and what her relationships are like, and really dig into her family as well, because it was a very big part of her. And
Mm.
ultimately what happens in the end, she realizes that a family that she's stuck between a kind of more impressive and prestigious life, and her family that is still struggling and don't understand her new world. I think what's interesting is you realize that at the end of it, that family that do understand despair know how to stand by someone who's struggling or who's suffering.
Mm.
In a way, it's a kind of coming together of her, the factors of her family that are so beautiful, that don't involve money, that just involve standing next to someone through the hard stuff, really comes about, and it kind of connects both her worlds together
Oh,
in a way.
that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I love that. I mean, it's there, but I didn't sort of see that, the shape
Yeah.
of it so clearly. I love that. And it's
So
so
I think
true,
in the
right?
novel I can stretch out and really kind of get into her head, because it's all from her perspective.
Yeah.
And she has a bit of a laugh at some other things other people does, or she can roll her eyes at some of the sort of more privileged kids and what they just take for granted that she never would have. And
Yeah.
and sometimes, and I did come from not a privileged background. So when I was a lawyer, I did have to watch how other people knew how to do things, like how to be in that very posh world, I guess, in a way that I hadn't ever been, but for them, they'd grown up there.
It does
So
feel like it helps her. I mean, and I don't know if this is true for you too, but it does feel like it helps Tess in the story by being a little bit of an outsider, observing that it gives her even more vehemence in her belief in it, because she's sort of admired it
yeah,
from the outside for so long. And it makes
yeah,
the fall of like the fall from grace of like her
yeah.
belief in the law sort of even more emotional because of that.
I'm so pleased you say that, because not only is she an outsider and she's watched it for so long, but the other thing is that if we look at her trajectory, I mean, her scholarship to Cambridge and being able to study law and then get into it and actually be in chambers in London. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was the golden ticket. It was, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the golden ticket,
Yeah.
so of course she's going to believe in it and love it and go, this is empowering for me. This has given me everything. And then for that thing to fail her when she most needed it not to. And also as a defense lawyer, you can argue beautifully and convincingly and be amazing, but you have to believe the system is fair. Otherwise, you realize that you've got an advantage because you're doing a certain case. And
Yeah.
so you realize the system isn't fair, it's harder to work in it because you think, well, if it's not fair, I mean, maybe I shouldn't be doing my best for this person. Like, so that it
Yeah.
is the whole idea of how the legal system works, because everyone's supposed to play their role and the system magically works, but
It's based on an agreement that there's going to be justice though, and that there's
that's
a
it.
chance for justice. And
Yeah,
without that chance, then what are we doing?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
do
When
you,
you say
sorry.
1.3% conviction, you go, well, there's not much chance for justice when you look at the numbers for the actual complainant. There
I
is for the,
can't
I mean,
believe that statistic. I mean, that is really crazy.
do you know one of the great things we had the school consent project in London and in New York, where these lawyers go out to schools and talk to young people about consent, and the producer set that up around the play. And
Mm,
that's had a phenomenal response of young people actually understanding the numbers and the fact that the law has to change, and how is the question how.
wow.
But it's just this interesting, I guess, just realizing that young people are hungry for this information, because it's a daily, for them, it's like, how do we do this? Are we supposed to sign a contract? And just
Yeah.
giving them tips in how to be having consensual sex so that they're not panicking about it by
Yeah.
saying, just check in. Is this okay? Is this okay? Like, like you don't just assume it for the whole range of the period that you're with somebody.
Yeah. And I'm assuming, and based also on what you were saying earlier, that the response to this play has provoked certain people to come forward or think about things that have happened to them. And do you have certain resources or organizations that you guys have put forward for people to reach out to if they need help?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and it's all around the play and it's all around the book publicity as well. But I mean, I feel like this is an interesting process with the novel because I'm writing for an audience of one. So I feel like that one is a conversation with the reader. That it does sort of, I mean, even though I know the actual scene of sexual assault is harrowing, it's more that she's explaining how out of body experience, how she just
Yeah.
feels that her psyche can't catch up with what's happening, which
Yeah.
is that freeze reaction. And
Yeah.
I feel like what's been great is the amount of women that have told me that after seeing the play or reading the book, that they felt really empowered because they had a language to talk about what had
Mm,
happened to them or what had happened to their friend or their sister, but also that they felt that, hey, this isn't my shame, it's the shame of the perpetrator and the system. And I think that makes me so happy, because that was what I wanted to shift. That why are women have suffered this also wearing the shame of it and not
yeah.
and being silent?
Yeah.
That's where our culture as a whole has really failed. And like we know that my grandmother's generation, for example, gosh knows what happened to them, but the truth
Yeah.
is that they would have just thought, oh well, that's just what happens. If you go to work, these things happen to women. If you go out at night, this is what. And so we just need to really challenge that, because now women have such autonomy around their sexuality that you think it's got to be a safe place out there.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to talk about this. Prima Facie is just, it's not only a beautiful piece of art, but something that has a life so beyond its performances, which is incredible to hear. I always ask one last question that has nothing to
Yeah.
do with your writing. Um,
Okay.
it, at any point in your life, is there any piece of advice that stuck with you from someone that you would want to share with the audience?
There is, like when I was, I think about 22, and I was partway through my law degree. But I just remember, and it's actually in the book as well, because I put it at the front. But I just thought, that very, very sort of very commonly thrown around idea that fortune favors the bold. I
Mm,
just feel that when there's a decision, take the bold one, like be a bold woman.
mm,
And I feel like that it makes you truthful to who you are, and it makes you decide to stand up and not make excuses for not, but it also makes you make decisions that are the road less traveled. I mean, I left the law to become a writer, which was a bold decision based
yeah,
on the fact that that I just thought that's really what I'd love to do. And it's just returned in abundance for me, and it was like a big risk at the time, because I invested so much of my time in becoming a lawyer, and
yeah.
I was a strong ad. I was in court every day, and
Wow.
financially, that it was a very different experience.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, but it really is my way of speaking to the world, and I feel like I've brought more to the world with that skill set than with my legal skill set. And strangely, it's a kind of combination of both that's come about. So I do feel like, just be bold in your decisions, and don't just think that you have to do what other people expect of you, because I have a lot of legal friends that are still lawyers that had actually amazing other talents, but
Yeah.
they were too scared to leave, or too scared to.
Wow. Imagine if we were all bold enough to be what we have to offer. What a world that would be.
I know, wouldn't it be amazing? I mean, of
Oof,
course, all the time, but sometimes just actually allow yourself to ask, what is the bold decision I could make here when I'm discontent or I'm not sure?
that's
And maybe
incredible.
explore it. Yeah.
All right, we're going to be bold. Well, Suzie Miller, thank you so much. I am so excited for people to read your play and read the novel. I can't wait for
Yeah.
the novel to come out in America so I can read the expanded version of this play that's meant so much to me. So, thank you so much for being on the bookshelf, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you about a project in the near future.
Oh, thanks, Jen. It's been lovely. Really appreciate it.